Today, I am speaking with Daniel Vitalis. Daniel is the founder of nutrition company Sir Thrival and host of the highly rated outdoor channel show WildFed, which is now in its fourth season in production. Daniel, thank you for joining the show, taking the time to speak to me and my listeners. Thank you, sir.
Oh, it's an honor, Devin. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So now for my audience that may not be familiar with your show, can you give me a brief description of what your show is all about?
Sure. So WildFed, like you said, we're in filming our fourth season right now.
Mhm.
It is a culinary adventure series. And so each episode kind of follows a similar trajectory, which is we go out into the wild and we hunt something or fish something. We go get some protein. And then we go out and we forage something. So that could be a plant, but it could also be from the, fungal kingdom. So a mushroom, or it could be algal, like a seaweed or something like that. But we go out and we harvest some kind of vegetable, and then we bring all those ingredients back. You sometimes with a chef, sometimes I'll cook, but we'll get together at the end and produce a meal. And then everybody who kind of was part of that comes together to share in that meal. And I've always say it's kind of a Trojan horse project to excite people about nature. And the bigger picture for me is that I sort of see human beings getting to this place where we're isolating ourselves so much from nature that we could almost forget about it as we go into the virtual world. And so I'm kind of like holding a door open to invite people, to have their own experiences out in nature.
Good, good. And of course, as I told you in our conversation, I'm a fan of the show. Um, it takes me back to when I was a kid, and helping my grandfather with he would go out and catch wild game and all kind of things. I will help him cut fish and cook frog legs, things that
Yeah.
my kids today would just look at as the weirdest thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the only guy in the inner city that had a chicken coop in his backyard, which was just
Yeah.
nuts. It was insane. Um, but just a little bit more about yourself. You learned how to hunt, fish, and forage as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
So, how long did it take you to acquire these skills? And what was it that set you in the path of wanting to take the wild food journey
Yeah.
as you have?
Well, it's kind of a long story because I started off, as a young kid in
Mhm.
a pretty fractured family environment, and had to kind of, I raised my brother and sister. I did a lot of parenting for my little brother and sister,
Wow.
and had to sort of learn how to take care of myself because
Mhm.
of some neglect that was happening in my own life. And so like food was a big part of that, because it'd be like, what am I going to eat today? Having to figure that out.
Mhm.
And that led me to ask a lot of questions about food over time. I became really fascinated by food and sort of self-care in general. And I started as a teenager getting excited about food at a sort of passion or hobbyist level, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
Of course, at that time, so I'm 45 today. So when I was 15 and 16 years old, it was before this food renaissance that's happened in the United States in the recent decades. It was well before not just places like Whole Foods, but even
Mhm.
real health food stores. So back then, health food stores were nothing like they are today. They were little closets that sold things that I wouldn't really even consider healthy food today. Textured vegetable protein from soy, or they would have some old kind of funky dates or whatever, just like weird stuff that
Yeah.
there wasn't all these products like we have today, and there wasn't this big health food movement like we have today. So I kind of started there, and I got influenced early on by a mentor who pointed me towards the idea of whole raw foods, and so I got really interested in that. I became a vegan for many, many, many years, over a
Wow.
decade, and I was a raw foodist as well. So I was eating nothing but, and I actually went even more hardcore for some time. I'm kind of an extremist, so I was on a fruitarian diet for a long time, eating just seeds and nuts, fruits,
Wow.
and not even eating salt or oils or anything like that. Just eating these whole foods. And over time, got really interested in the superfood idea, and all of that. And when you're looking at these things today we call superfoods, a lot of them are right on the boundary edge between being a cultivated food and being a wild food. So we have a
Hmm.
lot of foods in our still in our supermarket that you can find that are very close to wild foods. Like a couple examples would be asparagus. Asparagus is this food that we grow it, but if you see it in the wild, it's almost the same plant. And that's not true of a lot of our foods in the supermarket today. So in the same way that if you were to go to a pet store and you see the dogs in there, like
Hmm.
none of those dogs come out of the wild. They're all domesticated dogs that come from
Yeah.
wolves, right?
Yeah.
So wolves are so different than our domesticated dogs today. And in the same way, our broccoli and our cabbage and our kale and our apples and all that stuff, it's changed dramatically from the wild thing. But we have some foods that are right on the edge, and we tend to call those superfoods. And the
Mm.
reason, when you start to think about it, it's kind of obvious. Like, um, think about what the wolf has to do to survive day to day,
You're right.
because it doesn't have somebody taking it on walks. It doesn't have somebody opening a can of dog food or a bag of kibble. It doesn't have the protection of the home from other predators, from environmental factors. We take care of the dog, and that allows the dog to live a life, its whole life, where it
Mm.
kind of acts like a puppy,
Yeah.
right? And actually keeps traits we call neoteny. It's a dog has adult dog has traits of a puppy, like a curly tail and floppy ears, all these things that a wolf pup outgrows.
Hmm.
But the dog never outgrows them, because it never really has to become an adult, because we take care of all its needs. Well, this
Right.
happens with plants, right? So, you know, if you were trying to grow some lettuce in your backyard, you'll find out pretty quick, man, this lettuce isn't really fit for the natural world. All the
Mm.
insects are eating it, the deer are eating it, all the herbivorous animals are eating it. It's needs its soil all fluffed up. It needs to be watered. It needs to be fertilized. I got to put a fence around it. It's like, what's up with my lettuce?
Right.
Because the dandelions, which are wild, are having no problem. In fact, if you're not careful, they'll take over your lawn, and you can never
Mm.
get rid of them. But why
Mm.
doesn't lettuce get out of the garden and take over the lawn? Well, that's because the lettuce has been weakened by us taking such care of it, like a dog.
Right.
So, because we're providing all its needs, it lets go of all its own personal defenses, like the
Right.
bitter flavors that would be in there that would keep all the insects from eating it.
Hmm.
The reason I'm talking about all this is because the things that plants lose when they get domesticated are all the things that protect it in the environment. And it turns out those things are very nutritious and medicinal for us.
Right.
So an example would be like if we took a wild blueberry and a cultivated blueberry, we would see that every time the wild blueberry has far more antioxidants and
Okay.
polyphenols. Being in the wild, it has to protect itself from the sun and the environment in ways that cultivated ones don't. If we were to eat some wild lettuce versus cultivated lettuce, there's a drug in wild lettuce, a drug that was actually used in the past as a mild sedative. It'd be extracted to put kids to sleep. It was even used to substitute opium when people were trying to come off opium. In that
Wow.
latex, that you still see the remnant latex. Like if you take a romaine lettuce and you cut that very butt end of it, you'll see
Hmm.
it'll exude a little bit of white latex. Well, a wild lettuce puts out a lot of that. And so that's all this medicine and all this nutrition that we're not getting anymore from our supermarket foods.
Right.
So to bring it back around, the idea of superfoods are these foods that still retain a lot of these wild characteristics, and it makes them super more nutritious. And so I got really interested in that idea, and I started to realize that the trajectory for me went from growing up on Hamburger Helper or whatever and Twinkies,
Right.
and then working my way to Whole Foods, and then working my way to superfoods. And then I got to this place, I was like, oh, the magic's in all these wild foods. That's
Right.
what's really interesting to me. How do I get those? That led me to become a forager and eventually to become a hunter, so that I could, harvest not just plants and mushrooms, but also wild game as well, which is, inarguably a nutritionally kind of superior food too, if you have access to it.
What are some tips you may have for a person trying to get a healthier lifestyle or eat healthier that may not have the funds to do it, believing that that's an issue?
I think one of the smartest ways to save money on good quality food, and I know that most people are not going to go hunt and gather. So
Yeah.
I think the intermediate option there, the really good option is like, can I get, grass fed and pastured animals? Can I get organic vegetables? That kind of thing.
Mhm.
So when you do that, like for instance, if I was to go to the supermarket and buy beef, man, I mean, you just look at the price tag on it now. Whew, it's
Yeah.
getting high, right?
Yeah.
But that's assuming you're buying those easy to cook cuts that, you're paying a premium. What I do is I'll go to a farm and just buy the whole cow.
Mm.
Now you're
Mm.
paying like $4 per pound for everything. So that means, and this is a grass-fed cow. So that means
Mhm.
your filet mignon and
Yeah.
your loin meat and all of that's $4 a pound instead of $26 a pound.
Yeah.
And you're paying $4 a pound for bone and you're paying $4 a pound for grind. But now you get yourself a freezer for $125 and you
Mm.
buy a cow or a half a cow or a quarter cow, or you get four friends together or four families and you split a cow up. Now you're paying very little to fill your freezer. And now you're eating much more nose to tail because you're going to get some bones for bone stock. You're going to get some
Yep.
liver. You're going to get some heart. You're going to get the suet. So you're going to get all these different cuts. So you're not eating, because what doesn't make sense is what we do here. We go out and we eat the same piece of animal day after day after day. It's so
Yeah.
weird. It's like, you're just eating the same steak cuts out of the butt of a cow day
You're
after
not
day.
wasting anything. You're not
Yeah,
wasting
and
anything.
you're not getting the variety of all the
Mhm.
parts. Because
Yeah.
think about this, like in an animal, you've got, it's a gross simplification, but you've got kind of
Mhm.
two types of tissue. You've got the stuff that's very lean muscle meat, which we grind and eat as burger or chicken breast or something like that. But then we
Mhm.
have the stuff that has all the connective tissue in it, like the thighs and leg or wing of a chicken, or like a shoulder of a cow, where there's a lot more connective tissue. Well, turns out there's stuff in that connective tissue that we need to balance.
All
So
right.
that's really rich in the amino acid glycine, and meat's really high in the amino acid methionine, and we need to balance those.
Okay.
And we tend to get out of balance because we want to eat the king's cut every day. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when you buy an animal like that, you save a lot of money. The other thing is, and in the past, I would have felt hard. It would have been harder to say like the farmer's market, except now everywhere I go, I can find farmers markets
Yeah.
everywhere,
Yeah.
rural and in the city. And you go there and you figure out who you like, and you start to develop a connection to certain farmers,
Mhm.
and you buy from them, and you're getting better produce at a lower cost, and you start to develop those relationships, and before you know it, you're getting better deals. You're maybe going by the farm, maybe you trade a little work in exchange for some stuff or whatever it is, and you start to have these connections to where your food's coming from, and you're
Yeah.
saving a lot of money that way too. And I think something that you can't really put a price tag on, which is that connection to the food starts to
Mm.
develop. So I think there's significant savings that can be had there, because I mean, I hope everyone understands this. If I go to the supermarket and I buy a piece of broccoli, I'm paying the markup that went from, it goes from the
Yeah.
farmer to a distributor, from the
Mhm.
distributor to some kind of co-packer, from that place to then the buyer, then finally filters. By the time it's filtered down to the supermarket retail level, it's been marked up a half a dozen times. And you can cut through all those premiums by going direct. And so that's what I'd recommend, is you just work your way step by step closer and closer to the source of the food, and you'll save a lot of money, and not just save money, but the quality of the food will go up.
And you spoke about connection to the food. Um, and I think, and then we briefly talked about processed food. I think that there's um, a strong connection that's been built over time to the processed food movement, um, and in a way, it's caused some people to be addicted to certain processed foods because it's easier, simpler. Do you think there's a way for people to break that addiction and get into a more um, natural way of supply providing themselves with the nutrients they need to get through the day?
Yeah. I want to just preface this and say that processed food wasn't always a bad thing.
Hmm.
And that's because when you do what I do, hunt and gather, everything you bring home has to be processed.
Yeah.
And it's a ton of work. But it's the work that most human beings spent most of human history doing. This is what
Okay.
we were doing. It was like processing food because you bring it home and it's like a deer. Man, there's some processing's got to go down, you know?
Right.
You
Right.
bring home nuts. It's like you got to pick them all out of the shells. This is the processing work. So
Hmm.
initially, the idea of processed food meant that you had reached a level of affluence where you could pay someone else to do the processing.
Right.
And it freed up a lot of time, right, for people to explore other things with their life. And hence why we have the humanities and the arts and all these things, because people aren't spending all day processing food. But the processing's become industrial,
Right.
and things get a lot easier with chemical application. And then I think what goes on in the industry is this sense of, we know we're selling people toxic food, but they all think, well, it's not like they're only eating our food. And so every company says that, and then people are
Yeah.
eating only that food, right? A couple things I'll say is, as somebody who loves to cook and as somebody who loves to sweat,
Okay.
you can add a lot more salt to your food than you think when you sweat a lot, right?
Okay.
It's like, have you ever messed with hydration drinks? Like, do you do any
Yes.
hydration packs? Okay,
Yes.
I've been messing with that one Element, and
Okay.
dude, there's 1,000 milligrams of salt per package.
I
That's
don't do that unless I'm running high distance.
Yeah, you're gonna sweat a
Because
lot, right?
yeah, you're gonna sweat a
Yeah,
lot.
I do
Yeah.
sauna and I do CrossFit, and so I'm a sweater. So
Mm,
so that's like half a day's. I mean, that's a lot, but I can
yeah.
process that salt because I'm sweating. Now, if I wasn't training
Mm,
or in a sauna ever or anything like that, that's a lot of salt. But why
yeah.
I say that is because you go to a restaurant and you think, man, this food's so good. What is it? It's salt. You eat processed food. It's like, why is
Mhm.
this so good? It's salt. Then people try to go cook whole foods, and they're like, oh, that seems like too much salt. So they don't add enough.
Mhm.
And then it feels like that food never satisfies the same way that a bag of chips does. Well, the bag of chips has got several thousand milligrams
Tons
of
of salt
salt.
in it. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
messing with salt and oil and things like that, I think goes a long way to making food that's more satiating
Mhm.
and more in alignment with what people are used to. And, you think about coastal dwelling people through time. I mean, the salt content of seawater is so high. Like, if you're living on some shellfish and oysters, like, we can process a lot of salt. So the healthier your lifestyle, the more salt you can eat. And I think that that's a big part of it. Another
Okay.
thing I want to say is, over the years watching this stuff, I found that restriction is a difficult game.
Okay. How so? How so?
The more you try to cut things out, the more obsessed you get with those things. So I think the better approach is to not be hungry.
Okay.
So what I mean is, rather than think I got to stop eating this and this, if we eat more of what we want to be eating, we're full and
Yeah.
less prone to eating the other thing. So instead of thinking about what you're going to cut out, think about what you're going to put in that's going to push the other things out, because you just can't keep eating all day long. So if I make sure I have a good breakfast
Mhm.
of the things that I want to eat, that's got 1,000 calories or something, something nutritionally dense in the morning, then I'm not wanting to turn to all those processed, easy access foods because I'm full. And then if I
Right.
make sure I'm eating, so, and especially right now, because intermittent fasting has become very popular,
Mhm.
and that's a dangerous game because you got some hungry people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, like, I think that's great stuff when you're well founded in a program that works and you've been in it a while and you're solidified. But if you're like just trying to clean your diet up, you don't want to be too hungry, because it's going to lead to a lot of errors in your choices. So
Yeah.
feed yourself and push, use whole foods to push processed foods out. Because if you're leaving that opening, it's really easy to pull those things in. And then I think there's also a component of, when people get into like a guilt and reward cycle, it's hard to
Mm.
break that.
Yeah.
So if you are going to have something that, like, hey, this isn't something I always want to be eating, this is a treat
Mm.
for me here, enjoy it. Take the
Okay.
time to enjoy it. Like, if you're going to go out to, my wife and I like to go get ice cream in the summer together. We
Mhm.
train together. You know what I mean? So it's like, we'll come out of a workout and it's like, let's get ice cream. And then I want to enjoy it. I want to taste it. I want to enjoy it. I don't want to rush through it because I feel guilty and then not get the experience. And then all of a sudden I want the experience again because I didn't actually enjoy it. So then I'm like
Right.
looking to do it again. So when you do that, and everyone's going to allow themselves things from time to time,
Mhm.
rather than beating yourself up mentally as you do it, just go like, okay, this is my get out of jail free card. I'm just going to enjoy it. I'm going to enjoy it from a sensory level. And then I'm going to close that door and get back on my program.
I wanted to shift into foraging, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
Because that's one of the most exciting things and scary things that when I've looked at your show, there's always it's fascinated me, right? I think I saw a show where you went and you took like a like black lotus flower and you just picked it off of the tree and you just
Yeah.
chucked it into your mouth.
So tasty.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm like, I'm not brave enough, even
Yeah.
if like if I had um,
Hmm.
the skill to do it. But being an avid trail runner, I feel like if that was a skill that I had, just about every other day I will come back home with something because there's all kind of different scents of
Yeah.
things that's out there.
Yeah.
But I know foraging is a skill that it can potentially be life or death if you eat the wrong thing. Not to get too extreme with it, but what are some things a person can do to start learning
Hmm.
the foraging skill set like that you have, where you can actually identify things um, and go right up to it and eat it? What are the baby steps to getting there? I guess was what
Yeah.
I'm asking.
Well, let me give a couple of pieces of background. First, I want to say that the fears have been inflated. Not that
Okay.
there's not legitimacy for them, but it's kind of like the news, where every storm that comes through, they want to act like it's the storm of the century. It's like
Mm.
ratings, it's like that. It's like we've blown up these stories of how dangerous plants are. Now, there are some mushrooms that can be very dangerous and tricky. So I'm not talking about that, but just talking from the perspective of plants, there's
Mhm.
not a lot of plants that can harm you so badly that if you tasted it, you would just, get sick or die. It just doesn't quite work like that. There are some plants that could definitely kill you, but they also taste so bitter and bad that the
Mm.
chances of you ingesting them mistakenly and being able to tolerate it to the point that you could harm yourself, I mean, it's just not necessarily realistic. So that's one aspect of it.
Okay.
Um, the other thing I want to say is that knowledge of what's edible is not all that's needed for foraging, because plants are only edible typically. There's some exceptions, but most plants are only edible during certain parts of the year, and it's only certain parts of the plants in certain
Okay.
phases of their growth. So, I brought up an asparagus earlier. Well, an asparagus is the early shoot of a plant that when it's grown out to its full glory in the summer and fall, you would not, first of all, not recognize as an asparagus, and second, isn't a food. It's just a food when it's a shoot that comes up out of the ground early in the season. So you have to not only know that that's asparagus, but you have to harvest it at the right time. And at the
Okay.
end of that window of time, you got to be on to the next thing. So sometimes what people do is they learn like, oh, dandelions are edible. Cool. I know that now. And they tuck that in the back pocket and they don't realize like, well, they're not edible all year, you
All right.
know, not that they'd be bad for you, but that they just wouldn't be palatable or edible.
Hmm.
So that's important to know too. So, that's more obvious with things like fruits because they're obviously only there at a certain time of year. But
Right.
when it comes to plant tissues, it's like that. You need to know kind of when as well. Um, I started kind of on my own, so with field guides, and that's a hard road to go, but not
Mm.
unhelpful. So, getting good foraging books. I think the very best foraging books ever developed are by Sam Thayer, Thayer. Just an amazing, you know, it's cool. We have a guy in our era who is, one of the world greats, and he's alive right now, and he's in Wisconsin, and you can go work with him and you can buy his books and you can email him, and it's like, wow, we're really lucky there's a guy on earth right now like this guy. So his book, the Forager's Harvest series, so that's 3 books, and then he just put out a field guide, a more comprehensive field guide as well. Books like that are fantastic because the photos in them, if you spend time looking at them, sometimes what happens is you're like, whoa, that's the plant that I saw. I think that's the plant. And
Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
we always have cameras on us, so that's helpful. So you can take a photo and
Mhm.
compare it to but that's helpful.
Okay.
So that's one thing I like to do. Another thing I like to do is to get now most foraging books, this is a sad thing to have to tell you, but most foraging books are terrible.
Oh
They're written
wow.
by people who aren't really foragers. And
Wow.
yeah, a lot of
That is
times,
not encouraging.
No, well, I'm sure that running is like this,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
90% of what's said about running, you could probably throw away is garbage. So, but
Yes.
all of the, in most fields today in 2023, in most fields, the information that is the like generally accepted information tends to be, I hate to say it, it tends to be wrong. And you
Yeah.
have to like find the real stuff. So it's like that in foraging. And the other thing is that you got AI writing books now. So there's a bunch of books on Amazon right now that are not real people, not real authors, and that are not accurate because
Yeah.
they're generated by AI. So you got to get to, so that's why I mentioned Sam Thayer and in people he recommends.
Okay.
Now, another component is regionality. What I like about Sam's books is they cover most of the US, but you're going to want to, if you live in some extreme corner, if you're in Alaska, if you're in Maine, if you're in Florida, if you're in Texas, you want to get a guide that's more tuned, attenuated to your area. That's going to be very helpful, right? Because you don't want to be looking through all these images of plants that don't even grow where you live. So that's also helpful. Okay, one other thing I'll add to this is I like to spend time looking at the poisonous plants
Mm.
because let's say you move to a new town and there's 10 guys in that town that you want to stay away from.
Hmm.
They're just bad news dudes and you don't want anything to do with them. But
Yeah.
there's 10,000 people in that town. Is it make more sense to look through 9,990 people and try to remember all of them, or just figure
Yeah.
out who those 10 are that you want to avoid? So if you can do that for your area and figure out what are the things that I need to just make sure I stay away from, that's helpful too, because that makes you a little more relaxed about tasting things and messing around. Last
Okay.
thing I'll say about this is most plants you can taste.
Okay.
Don't swallow, just taste, see what kind of response you get. Um, Things that are horribly bitter, that's a
Hmm.
good indicator you're dealing with something toxic. Doesn't mean it's not a food though. Sometimes there's ways that we remove that through leaching, through cooking, through peeling, but don't be afraid to taste things. I mean, I'm thinking of very, very poisonous plants that we have here, like water hemlocks, very, very poisonous plant. But
Wow.
I've tasted it. It's not like I died or anything. And then
Okay.
some things that we hear about are toxic. They're toxic in doses that you would just never, the seeds of the cherry family plants. So
Hmm.
that's cherries, but any of the, the apricots, that's even apples. These seeds you'll always hear, oh, they're poisonous. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, if you ate 5 gallons of them, but you just can't, so it's like not
Yeah.
really a concern. Okay, now to dial in a little bit more, what I really recommend you do is you find local foragers. So you start getting online. So if you live in the Richmond, Virginia area, you just
Hmm.
get on there. You start looking for plant walks, botanical societies. Maybe there's a botanical garden where you can go and there's some
Hmm.
botanists there, that kind of thing. Maybe there's an adult ed program on, that kind of stuff. And you start to find the people in your area that are doing it because there's people everywhere doing this stuff. And so you start to dial in with them because the best way is to be introduced to a plant by a person in the same way that, I would way rather be introduced to a person than cold call a person. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So it's
Yeah.
nice when somebody goes, hey, I want to introduce you to this plant at the right time in the place where it grows, and you can start to make those kind of connections. That's more powerful. So I've done a
Okay.
lot of 1-day workshops, 2-day workshops, 3-day workshops where you're really going out and you're getting the hands-on experience, because it's not just knowing the plant, but it's actually knowing, how do I harvest it, what
Hmm.
parts. It's simpler where it's like, let's say you're running on a trail and you see blueberries, that's easy.
Yeah.
But if you see
Well,
acorns,
it may seem like it's easy
once
to
you
the
know it's a
trained eye.
blueberry for
Yeah.
sure,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
right?
Mm.
And you don't need a lot of botany for this. I mean,
Okay.
to be honest, like when I see my mom, I don't pull out a tape measure and make sure it's my mom. Like, is this,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? I just know by eye. It's like, that's my mom or whatever. I
Hmm.
could tell from 300 yards, I don't need to. So I don't have to do botany every time to make sure it's a blueberry. Once I know, I know. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Now, but that's easy. You pick that, eat it, good to go. No processing needed. But let's say you're running and you see some really nice acorns. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's about 10-day process to turn that into food. It's a great food, but
Yeah.
it's a big process. And so that requires specialized learning. So that's where you really want to dial in to those groups. But for fruits, berries, stuff like that, most people can learn that on their own if they have the diligence to get in the field guides. You know, usually in the beginning of a field guide, right in the front, it'll
Hmm.
have, a handful of botanical things that are helpful to learn. Like, are these entire leaves or toothed leaves? Are they alternate or opposite? Like learning a little bit of botany so that it helps you identify. But mushrooms are a different thing. That's
Okay.
much more serious.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And I think
most
that's where
places,
my fear come from. Not to cut you off, where my fear comes from. I had a friend, family member that ate a poisonous mushroom and lost sense of taste. I mean, I guess
wow,
that was a lucky
permanently?
thing. Permanently lost sense of taste. Well, at least
Wow. Yeah. Mushrooms are wild, man. There's
it,
some stuff. There's a
it,
mushroom called the destroying angel.
mm,
And what happens if you eat that is you get really sick and then you recover. And then a couple days later, you die.
whoa,
Yeah. So liver
wow.
failure, So that's what a cruel
What is
game
it?
that
What is
is.
that called?
The
The
destroying angel.
gracious.
Um, yeah. So there's another one called the death cap, similar kind of thing. So with mushrooms, what's helpful is most areas have a mycological society. So mycology is the study of mushrooms. So myco means
Hmm.
mushroom or fungi, and most places have a mycological society. Now, mycological societies are it's a fun world because mushroom people are different than plant people.
Hmm.
It's like these are all like individual little scenes. What I like about hunting and gathering is I can unite all these scenes in one thing, but they're
Yeah.
different. Mushroom people are a more intellectual crowd than the plant people are. That's for sure. They're deeper in, but they love to share their stuff. And so that's where going out on mushroom walks and being shown. And so that's not one where I'm out there. If you come out with me and you're like, Daniel, what's that mushroom? I'm going to be like, I don't know. You're like, what's that one? I don't know. I just know the ones I
Okay.
know.
Okay.
Once you know 5 or 6, that might be all you ever need to know. Maybe you only ever need to know one, and it's just like, I just like eating that one mushroom. So you learn the ones that are safe, and you don't need to worry about what all the other ones are. You definitely don't want to be messing around tasting mushrooms the way I suggested you could with plants. That's a
Right.
different game. So I don't mess around with mushrooms too much. I
Okay.
have probably about 10, 12, 15 species that I know pretty well. And I've learned them over the years. And so that's another thing. Like anything you come into, fitness is a great example.
Yeah.
You come into it knowing you need it, and then you think you get a quick handle on it, and then all of a sudden you
Mhm.
realize, oh man, there's a lot here, and these people don't all agree, and oh, what's the
Yeah.
right approach, and should I do this or that? And you get really overwhelmed. It's like it's
There's
similar,
different angles to approaches, is what you're saying.
yeah, and
Um,
it can get overwhelming. So when there's so much to learn, so what
okay.
I tell people is learn one plant, learn one mushroom, and maybe that's all you want to learn that year, and the next year learn one more or two more, and you just learn them slow. It's like making friendships. These are living creatures, so you can develop relationships with them. And so let it unfold slow. You don't need to go at it. If you try to go at it all at once, it's going to overwhelm your mind. It's too much to learn. So
Mm.
go slow, and step by step is how I recommend.
This time of year is marathon season. At least in my neck of the woods is marathon
Yeah.
season, and one of the pre-race, post race things that a lot of runners do is we carb load. Carb load before a run, just to make sure that you have that built up glucose for your runs. And their go-to meal that I go to usually is like spaghetti and pastas and things like
Yeah.
that. Um, are there any clean options that you would suggest as a good carb loading clean
Yeah.
meal that a runner could eat?
Yeah. So you're speaking of having that because you want your liver glycogen topped up, you want your muscle
Yep.
glycogen topped up,
Hmm.
um, which I think if we're realistic, most people are pretty topped up. But if you've been
Hmm.
running training, burning that down, yes, you definitely want to top that up. So if I was thinking about carbs that I think are like the highest quality carb you could buy, would be wild rice.
Okay.
But I don't mean wild rice like you're going to get at the store. So I'm going to give you a place to go for it. I like this company called I would say Moose Lake or Moose River, Moose Lake. And that's so out in the Midwest is a wild rice. The genus is Zizania. The species is palustris, I think, Zizania palustris. And And for, you know, many thousands of years, this has been harvested on these lakes by canoe, by hand, by native people. You know, you put two people in a boat, one person pushes the boat with a
Hmm.
pole, and the other person uses these lightweight knocker sticks to knock the rice into the boat, and then they process that. And that, the quality of that rice is
It's
incredible.
good.
So that's like my favorite carb. For something more supermarket available, I like rice with lentils. Brown rice with lentils is a thing that I've always loved to make, as just a clean, you know how when you mix a grain and a pulse,
Hmm.
you get that complete protein. So I like that because you can get your carbs, but also you're eating a complete protein as well, which I think is way more functional than just digging on a bowl of pasta.
Yeah.
And you know, I'll be honest, it can be really, like, my wife is a pasta lover, and I'm, you know, once or twice a year at an Italian restaurant that actually makes pasta, I might have it, but I don't care for it. I'm not a
Mm.
bread or pasta guy. I just haven't really been. But my wife is, you know, she
Yeah.
comes from Montreal, Canada. She likes croissants. She likes bread. She likes pasta. She likes all of that.
Okay.
Um, and so sometimes we'll do that rice and lentils, like I said, brown rice and lentils, cook them together. So equal parts of each, cook them together, and she'll put pasta sauce on it. And it's delicious like that.
Wow.
So you're still kind of getting that same sensory experience of eating pasta, but you're getting a complete protein, and you're getting, you know, just a more nutritionally dense food. Because I want to go back to something I said earlier, which is I think fitness trumps diet, but it's not that simple, because if you're not getting all the nutritional density you need, you'll wear your body down, especially running, right? It's
Yeah.
running's like, you know, I spend 4 hours a week doing zone 2 cardio.
Okay. Okay.
And I have several machines here at the house.
Hmm.
So I have a rower, I have a bike, I have a ski erg, and I have a curved treadmill, like a true form runner treadmill.
Okay. Oh, good.
And I also have an assault bike, and I push a sled. So I got
Wow.
multiple things here that I do. So because I like to
Okay.
alternate it, because
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'll do 1 hour sessions, and that's my typical 4 times a week. So I switch it up a lot so that I'm not getting too much of any one and getting bored, you know?
Hmm.
And I like to run on a heart rate monitor, or I like to
Okay.
train on a heart rate monitor. Nothing's like running. It's
Yeah.
amazing. When I get on my treadmill or I go outside and I run, my heart rate always goes immediately when I fall into my cadence,
Mm-hmm.
and I like to run 180 steps a minute if I can.
Mm.
I'm right at my lactic threshold, which for me is about 136 beats a minute. When I get on any of my ergs, any of my machines, I have to work. Why I like the heart rate monitors, because it keeps me honest. I have to work way harder than I want to get to that same place that running just puts me at.
Yeah. Yeah. You have the element factors, the elevations and everything else that
There's just
the
so much going
outdoors
on with it.
bring. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that also tells me it's more intense than any of the other things.
Hmm.
Like, so if I was just going to ride a stationary bike, or I was just going to use my rower, it's pretty gentle on my body. I can probably get away with a little more, but
Hmm.
running asks more of your body. And that means you need those nutrients that repair tissues,
Yeah.
right? Because what do we always, remember before I was saying how important it is to have the glycogen rich parts of the proteins that we eat. That's all the connective tissue. Because what goes wrong in a person who overuses their body, it's meniscus, it's cartilage.
Injuries.
You want to
Yes.
feed that stuff. And
Yeah.
that stuff's not in steak. That stuff's in the joint capsule. That's in the bone stock.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you put a roast in the crock pot and all that gelatin comes out, turns to
Yeah.
jello. That's like how you feed your connective tissue matrix. And
Okay.
if I don't know if you're familiar with Shane Benzi's work on running, he wrote I think it's The Art of Running, is the Lost Art of Running. What a book. And
Okay.
so Shane Benzi is taking the work of, there's a guy in Maine actually called Thomas Myers,
Okay.
and he was a student of Ida Rolf. I don't have you ever heard of Rolfing, the bodywork technique?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
Ida Rolf developed this bodywork, 10-session bodywork technique, where instead of massaging the muscles, you work the connective tissue that the muscles are embedded in. Right.
Hmm.
So that idea is like, if I start to pull on my shirt in one end, it's a connected fabric. So if I start to tighten up one end, it's going to tighten everywhere.
Everything. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
This stuff, the connective tissue, also is extremely elastic. So Shane, who'd be great for your show, by the way, he's amazing.
Mhm.
His work, he went in, to Kenya and Ethiopia and looked at these runners, and he kind of came to the idea that they're springing along on their connective
Air.
tissue
Yeah.
rather than
Mhm.
pushing with their muscles all the time. We're running wrong, and we're
Mhm.
not using our body dynamically properly. But if you've been nutritionally starved of all of this connective tissue feeding stuff, all of those gelatin like substances, all that, that glycine, then your connective tissue is weak. And it's hard to get that elastic running
Right.
form that's allowing these guys to do 2 hour marathons.
Yeah.
So
Your
we're working
body's
hard and we're
compensating for basically the
yeah,
lack thereof of what they have versus what we're working with. So
right.
yeah.
So we've got, and the thing is connective tissue is affected by your thoughts and your emotions. You
Mm.
can see it. You look at somebody who's in a bad mood, you can see that they're in a bad mood because it distorts how their body posture and body language is. And you can
Mhm.
see when somebody feels open and comfortable. And when you run open and comfortable, your body's elastic and springy. You know what I mean? And so connective
Yeah.
tissue requires, good mindset, good emotional health, working through past emotional trauma, but also requires that you feed it that good stuff. And so that's why I think you're better off having, something that came out of the crock pot than just burgers all the time or whatever for your meat, or just chicken breasts. You want all of that connective tissue that's in organs too. You want the stuff that's in skin and all of that. I think that's really important for runners, more so
Okay.
than people who do cardio training in other formats. I think running, of all of them, it's just the hardest on your body if you're not taking good care of yourself.
Turkey Day is around the corner. Thanksgiving is around the corner.
Yeah.
What is your dish of choice? I think your wife's name Ivani.
Yeah.
So what do you guys go to in the Vitalis house is the dish of choice for Thanksgiving?
Well, wild turkey,
Yeah. Okay.
which I is amazing. Um, it's not as succulent as the butterball, but nutritionally, I think a better food. And the other one's gonna be cranberry sauce that we make from wild cranberries. So this is actually cranberry season right now,
Okay.
and we've had a couple frosts and just a touch of snow here, and the cranberries get a little better after there's been a frost, a little sweeter.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll take the canoe out and gather. They grow in these bogs right on the edge of the bogs and the peat moss, and we'll harvest out those berries, and then we make maple syrup in the spring here from our trees. And so my cranberry sauce is 3 ingredients. It's water, cranberries, and maple syrup. And
Oh,
so I'll make our own cranberry sauce, cook that down. And that's, I mean, that with the turkey is, I mean, that's just as good as it gets
oh.
for the holidays for me. This last thing I'd love to say about nutrition is just
Yeah.
that it's not, you know, we come from a food scarce environment historically,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why the taste of sugar and the feeling of fat in our mouth is so delectable, because we have systems designed to say, hey, that's nutritional density.
Yeah.
Fat and sugar are rare in nature. And when you get something like ice cream, it's got all that fat and you feel that in your mouth. And then it's got
Mm,
all that sweet and you taste that in your mouth. And the perspective of the human animal, that's a perfect food. Now, from the perspective of a healthy person in modern culture, of course that's not the case, but as a
yeah.
just a body, when you get that something like that, it's got the things you're designed to look for in nature: sugar and fat. And so, you taste
Mhm.
ice cream, your body goes like, this is about the best thing that there is, right? And that's for a reason. So that's there's incredible intelligence behind our design, and I think we should honor that instead of self-flagellating and beating ourselves up for liking things like
Yeah.
that. It's just a matter of, it's like a little kid, you like, there's times where a kid wants to do something and you have to be the grown up who says, look, I know that would be more fun right now, but this isn't the time. And we have to be
Right.
able to do that to ourselves. But there's times where you let the kid play. And I think we have to do that too.
I agree. I think it's like we're conditioned to, I mean, if you look at, if you follow any type of diet plan or whatever, um, we're conditioned to think that if you go off of that plan at any point, it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
And you feel guilty about it. I think most people feel guilty about it because they feel like you're going backwards versus trying to progress.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think we have to give ourselves that out to every now and then be able to enjoy, whatever type of
Yeah.
food that you like, or whatever type of pleasure that you may like to eat, without beating yourself over the head
It's
about
like
it.
the
So
80-20 rule. And,
yeah.
I think that we could also say it like this. I think everybody's kind of heard this kind of cliche now, but the idea like on your deathbed, you're not there thinking, I should have made more money. I should
Mm.
have worked harder. I should have spent more. You also, I don't think on your deathbed, you're like patting yourself on the back for all the workouts you did. I think you're thinking more about the good
Yeah.
times, and some of those good times
Yeah.
are going to just revolve around foods that you wouldn't necessarily put in your diet plan, but it's because it's something we share with friends and family, and those, and so all of this work that we do, the
Mm.
hard work of training and the hard work of diet, for me is just a means to an end, which is a longer lifespan with more quality of health, like a longer health span, and maybe if I
Mm.
can, a longer lifespan. I'm not doing it because it's there's sacrifice there. And the sacrifice is so, like, it's like if I eat a little less now, I can eat more because I'll live longer. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? It's like that kind of a thing. So we want to, I think it's important that we don't look at this as just, it's a means to an end. It's not the end.
Right.
You're not going to be satisfied on your deathbed because of all the things you restricted. You're going to be most grateful for the experiences that you shared lovingly with others. I mean, that's really, I think you'll look back on your running career and it'll be more about the people you ran with, the people at the races, the people at the finish line, the people who cheered you on, the people you cheered on. That's going to be the sweeter memory than all the miles you logged that week or whatever it is. Like there's those of us who are drawn to disciplines
Hmm.
need to be careful that we don't let that override the sweetest parts of life.